Hello, I'm Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress, and I'm excited to welcome you to Pop Life, Literature, and Culture, featuring our 2020 Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction winner, Colson Whitehead. I promise today's program will be as entertaining as it is revealing. You will hear about the many ways popular culture stimulates us and influences our lives. But first, a few words about our special prize. The Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction is meant to honor an American literary writer whose body of work is distinguished not only for its mastery of the art, but also for its originality of thought and imagination. Colson Whitehead, the 12th and youngest ever recipient of the prize, certainly meets that description. Whitehead's many honors include Pulitzer Prizes for both of his two last novels, The Nickel Boys and The Underground Railroad. He will be joined by his longtime friend, Kevin Young. Kevin is an award-winning poet, author, and editor, most recently of African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song, a Library of America anthology. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, Kevin served as director of the New York Public Library Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And this January, Kevin became the director of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Their conversation will be moderated by Isaac Fitzgerald. Isaac is a frequent guest on the Today Show and the author of the best-selling children's book, How to Be a Pirate. He is also an expert in the field of popular culture and the many ways it pervades our lives. I know you will find this talk as fascinating, surprising, and informative as I did. So please welcome Colson Whitehead, Kevin Young, and Isaac Fitzgerald.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayden, for those wonderful introductions. And welcome, Colson. Welcome, Kevin. How y'all doing?
Hanging in there, you know.
Yeah, it's been a year. But listen, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be talking with you both, especially about this subject. So I wanted to start here for each of you. And if one of you wants to start us off, basically, what are the ways that pop culture influences your writing? What are the ways that pop culture influences your work?
Well, you know, for me, I mean, I draw a lot of inspiration from the city, from history, weird musings I have walking down the street, and then of course pop culture. I was like many Gen Xers. I was raised on TV. I saw Richie Cunningham more than like my parents, because you know I knew where they were every day at 4 p.m. And I think I've always loved music, always loved film and TV. And my first book, The Intuitionist, comes from detective novels, also cop shows, and film noir. When I wrote in the 90s, it was like the sort of height of like the really strong female protagonist in thrillers, whether it was Silence of the Lambs or Prime Suspect, and that fed into, you know, one of my ideas about having a female protagonist. And you know, of a zombie novel, I've always been an avid consumer, and so it seems naturally for that to inform the kind of art I make.
For it to come out in your work. And what about you, Kevin, as a poet, as a writer? What are some of the ways that you pull from pop culture?
Well, I mean, like Cole, I grew up with TV. You know, I used to know, and I still think I can repeat most of the schedules of evening television on the three major networks. On Saturday, I used to just like, you had to endure Lawrence Welk, and then there was Hee Haw, and then, you know, Love Boat. Like, I knew sort of Fantasy Island. You were sort of waiting and just watching all day, and that comes out in different ways. I think definitely when I was working on my second book, which was about Jean-Michel Basquiat, I realized he read some of the same bad comic books and watched the same, you know, had the same bad cartoons floating around in his head. So for me, it was really another way of thinking about oral culture too as an influence. So, you know, the blues influenced me. The blues is both, you know, folk culture and pop culture, and it certainly influenced all pop music. So by talking about the blues, for instance, it was a way of talking about pop culture, but also sort of American society, all these other things. And I've always found it a renewable resource. And, it's hard to write about reality TV for me, at least right now, but I still enjoy it, or enjoy, is that the right word? I still consume it, and I still, write in front of it sometimes and edit in front of it. I think, it's almost like background noise for me, television.
In terms of it being a renewable, the Intuitionist comes at detective fiction, sideways, like it's sort of like a postmodern detective story. And like I'm in the middle of writing straightforward crime fiction now, without any sort of ironic distance or postmodern distancing. And so there's two different ways of talking about the same thing, but 25 years apart, I'm back using the same structure, but using it, in a very different ways.
That's so fascinating to think about the ways in which the conversation of that decade kind of comes through in your work, and we find ourselves almost back at this more straightforward way of looking at crime. I was wondering, was there ever a time, like both of you are very willing to talk about the ways that pop culture has influenced your work. You've had a lot of interviews where you talk about that. Was there ever a time, maybe earlier in your career, where you really tried to have pop culture not influence your work, where you were actively working against, the conversation of the moment?
Well, my first job was working for the Village Voice in New York City, Alternative Weekly, and my first writing gig was writing television reviews. And so my big break into writing was writing a think piece about the series finales of the shows Growing Pains and Who's the Boss. And I think 28 years later, it really stands up as a definitive think piece on those two seminal TV shows. I don't want to toot my own horn, but
Toot away.
But my first, because I was a TV critic, my first attempt at a novel, which is unpublished, was about a TV star, and it was about a Gary Coleman-esque figure who grows up and is abused by the media sphere. So my first time at bat writing a novel, it was completely steeped in pop culture and television, and so I've never shied away, and I've gotten a lot of energy out of it.
And what about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I don't remember shying away. I mean, it was just part of the water, and especially things like The Voice, I think, rest in peace, was a place that, it took pop culture really seriously. And it was a more popular place that did what, academics sometimes did, which was think about movies and think about TV as talking to us in ways that are really important. So for me, I think we were both probably grew up after that shift and things had happened. And I think Cole going to the source, as it were, and writing at the place that kind of helped make that happen, I think was really important. And he also was at the book review working. And so those times that he was there, I think he had his finger on the pulse of all of that. And that was really important, I think.
Well, I think, growing up in New York City and buying The Voice every Wednesday, I would flip to the art section, and you'd have like Robert Christgau and Greg Tate and Lisa Jones, Elvis Mitchell. And one week they're writing about Derrida, and the next week they're writing about Spider-Man. And it just seemed like this is the way you engage with the world and the culture. You deal with the high and the low, and they're both equal. And some of the brainiest people were most eloquent when they talked about so-called low culture. And there seemed to be no divide.
Right. I think someone like Basquiat, for me, was really key. And, he'll have lists of, Roman generals next to, TV shows and cartoons. And, to be a literate reader, as it were, of his paintings, you had to know both of those things. And they were really pleasurable to discover this junk culture. I mean, because it wasn't even just like low, it was like crappy culture that you then like saw as part of art, it was part of the layers of life. And he layered that into his paintings. And so, of course, when you sit down to write, why wouldn't you layer that in? I also think there was a kind of, and I think Cole's been really good at this throughout his writing, there was a humor that came from kind of the frisson of these two things too. Sometimes it wasn't simply like a natural resource, it was also like there was some pleasure, some absurdities that you could get at by setting them next to each other and making them really as important as they each were, but then also saying, isn't this weird how we go from this to that? And that's more to me like life is, or, the blues does that with tragedy and comedy. Why not do that with High and Low? Why not do that with, Roadrunner and, Beckett? They both seem to me these existential explorations of what it means to not get what you want, or to escape always. So those were part of what I think we saw as just our inheritance.
And you get more out of the artwork with the more knowledge that you have of it. Like you're saying, I love the phrase you used, Kevin, that it was in the water. To bring us, we've been talking a lot about television at the moment, but to kind of bring us up, it started in the 90s.
Let's go high now, because
no. I'm going
on everything.
Baby. Colson, you've talked about in the past your love of video games, and so I wanted to ask, like, what is it about video games as a storytelling form that kind of speaks to you? What do you enjoy about video games?
Well, actually, I don't see it nourishing my work. It's really just to clear my head in between projects. And so definitely finishing Underground Railroad and Nickel Boys, not wanting to think about people being abused, people being ground beneath the institutional racist structures of America. Taking 6 weeks off to play XCOM or something like that just totally turns off my brain. I'm not sort of creating, I'm following someone else's story. I think I started, I played video games as a kid, and then picked it up again when my daughter was born. She was like 6. I was like, here's Angry Birds, have fun with that. And I'm like, actually, that seems pretty cool. Maybe I'll download it on my phone, and suddenly I'm playing, When my son was born 10 weeks premature, he's fine now, but he could only sleep if he was on us. And so you couldn't put him in a crib because he'd like yell and scream. He'd only sleep if he was on us. And so I had like a 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift because my wife has a real job. And so I would just hold him like here and then play iPad games for 4 hours because I wasn't sleeping, so I would drop him. And so I got back into it. And it's really a way to just turn off my brain after the furious activity of writing a book. I need to cleanse the palate.
It's almost a pop culture that you enjoy in the ways that it doesn't influence your work.
Yeah, I mean, like when I stopped being a TV critic, it was nice to just watch TV and not have a really highfalutin idea of what Tony Soprano means. When I was touring in China for Underground, and someone had made a video game connection, like each state being another level in the game. I'm like, how do you address like the video game influence on Underground Railroad? And I was like, well, for you, that's your reference. For me, it's the Odyssey, like a hero has to solve an allegorical problem and then move on to the next allegorical problem. But sure, if you see it as levels and boss levels, that's fine by me.
I mean, you're both influenced. I mean, video games are influenced by that rather than.
Sure, yeah. So it all goes back. Back to Homer. So
it's all. I mean, what do you have like a pop culture that's an aspect of it that for you it's not in the water? Like it's just you don't look to it for influence. It's just for pure enjoyment.
It probably is reality TV in some way because I can't remember week to week like who's the contestants, even their names on The Bachelor. But I watch it fairly often, So that's the pleasure of it. I don't have any like retention or anything, though I did end up writing about sort of fakery in American life in a book called Bunk. And I started to realize the ways that reality TV was part of this long sort of tradition of these enjoyments, these entertainments in American life that were kind of fake, but also kind of real. And there were ways of, there was a kind of continuity. And so I kind of tricked myself into realizing that I'd been studying all along, which I hadn't meant to.
You're like, this was just supposed to be a simple pleasure.
I'm like, great. That's the best analogy I had.
And now it's come into it. All right, well, Kevin, I want to also ask you, you're the new director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which I was lucky enough to, I love that museum so much, and it's wonderful to be able to talk to you. I want to talk a bit about how Black culture influences pop culture. Or let's just say it what it is. Black culture is pop culture. How important for you as the director of the NMAAC, HC,
yeah.
HC is telling that story?
I just call it the museum for ease. So
let's do that.
But I think that Black culture is so central to American culture, and I think that's something the museum is really good at tracing, and not even tracing, like embodying, and you encounter that over and over again. And even if you, like me, and I think Cole too, have spent a lot of time thinking about American history, once you go through it, you start to see it almost everywhere and up close. Seeing this picture, for instance, of Harriet Tubman as a young woman that we recently obtained with the Library of Congress and own with them, which is a wonderful thing. It just changes both your idea of Harriet Tubman, which is kind of a popular idea, a popular image. And now that image is one that, people like stamp on $20 bills or, think about and take as their own. And I think that's what's fascinating about Black culture, are the ways that it's influential. And then sometimes it's, of course, not always recognized in the ways that it's as influential as it is. Things like country music come from Black culture in both Hank Williams and, the Carter family all studied with and learned from Black musicians, for instance. And so when Old Town Road comes out, I don't see it as this kind of strange anomaly. I see it as this constant conversation and returning to the source in some way. And so I think it's important to kind of know that. Obviously, we talk about pop culture and sports and film, and we're really in this interesting renaissance right now in all of these art forms and Black art forms that I think we can see again the ways that they're influential on popular culture and also the American imagination writ large.
And one more step along the way. Go Colson, go.
I was just saying nicely done. I like the wind up at the end there.
Thanks.
that kind of is this Colson, is this something that you also kind of see happening? That's a phrase that Kevin just used, that we're going through a kind of another Black Renaissance.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like all the Renaissances have a beginning and the end, and they're always so brief. So I don't want to tie it to previous. I instinctively go back to previous moments of inflection, and then you look back and they're sort of brief. But I think there's some wonderful, great things happening now. It does in some way remind me of that, that period in '87 to '92 when there was that explosion in Black film, and it was Julie Dash and Spike Lee and John Singleton, and everything seemed possible. And what I think is cool now is that people who were 8-year-olds then are now making movies. They're making TV shows, and they're now having their own conversation with America and the world, inspired by this, example from their childhood.
From the things that they pulled on from what they were watching, much like yourself, and with your books. As we're talking about all this, it's hard as the moderator not to feel like you two are old friends, and I love to just listen to both of you talk about this, because you have a friendship that goes back to college, and one of my favorite things is literary friendship. So I want to kind of ask, first let's start. How long have you known each other, and do you remember first meeting one another?
I do.
I think it was 89 or 90.
89, I think.
A junior, you were a sophomore, and Kevin and his crew of talented artists were reviving a Black literary magazine from Harvard in the '60s called Diaspora, and I definitely didn't know any of the Black artists on campus, and I think Kevin was like, I heard there's this guy up in this far. I was like in the Brooklyn of dorms. I was really far away. And somehow you heard about this guy who writes but doesn't actually get accepted to any of the writing workshops, and he asked me to contribute to the magazine. So.
He this is some slight exaggerations, but he was in the Brooklyn of dorms, and we met in my dorm. My co-editor said, I know this guy, you got to meet him, he's great. And so I come in, and my recollection is that I walked in and you were wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and chucks, and I was wearing like white t-shirt, khakis, and chucks or something. It was like, oh, okay, I guess we're friends, you know. So we couldn't quite swap clothes. He's a lot taller than me, but it felt like we, you know, had read the same things and fallen in love with the same bad movies. And you know, I recall, we didn't always talk about writing, but we shared that outlook on writing.
Can I ask, do you have some early memories of what bad movies you were talking about, or what were kind of capturing your like you were saying, your friendship, it's built on fashion, it's built on there, right? But there's those early days. What were the building blocks of this relationship?
Well, probably not like my horror movie thing, but you know, the '80s, John Hughes, and then in terms of pop culture and hip hop, you know, it was very young form then, you know, 17 years old, and so just, you know, here's this new band called De La Soul. What? You know, Called Quest, huh? You know, and Public Enemy, you know, the first seminal records, and so it was just a great time to be a consumer and an aficionado, and then baby inventor of
That's a good way to put it. I mean, I think I remember listening to the first Ice Cube record with Cole. Cole he would get early cuts of things, and he got like the early version of Balloon Mind State. I remember we took a road trip and listened to Balloon Mind State and you know, Howl by Allen Ginsberg, and like, you know, just kind of nerded out. But it was also just, you know, that's what it meant to be young, black, and creative, and whatever, you know, 1993 or 1992, and we were trying to write. You know, I think I published Cole's first story, or that came out in that magazine, and you know,
it was 5 days long. I was really winded afterwards.
he read it. I remember his first reading. He read sitting down, which I thought was amazing. Like I literally thought it was the coolest thing ever. And
petrified and like.
And I don't want people to see me shaking, so I'm gonna sit.
It was more like what's his name? The guy used to give monologues, sitting down at a table.
Spalding Gray.
Spalding Gray. It was like that. It had that effect. It was like, I am so good that I just sit here and you listen. It was amazing.
It reminds me to have some water. He was always drinking water, like.
right, exactly. Awesome. And I just remember there were a lot. You know, I think that was the other thing, was suddenly there were all these people writing and talking about film and music and whatever, and that's what kind of, I think our first issue of that magazine was film, the next was music or something like that. And it seemed like a great time to be able to do that. And
at the same time, you know, the Dark Room Collective was taking off, you know, a few subway stops away.
Right.
You know, great young poets and fiction writers, and there was a real community there. I do remember we took a road trip to New York, and I remember to see the Basquiat show, but half the people kept saying Basquiat, like we didn't know, like we were all sort of autodidacts, or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, is it Basquiat or is it Basquiat? Like, I'm not sure. Basically, I was like, let's go see the show. I didn't want to be ridiculed for saying.
Well, and that's weird. It was one of the big first shows before his retrospectives after he died. I think it was the drawing show. And
90.
Yeah, it's a really, really important show. And you know, if you had told me then I was going to write a 350-page book about him, I would have been like, I don't know, I barely knew how to say it. I remember a dark member correcting me. It's like, it is not Basquiat. Like it's be patient. Don't what? It's like Du Bois. People say Du Bois wrong. Don't make that mistake.
They're like, and now you don't deserve to see show it all. And
they let you see it, and then they made fun. It was happening.
But that comes back to everything that we're talking about, which is that you can appreciate the art on the level that it's at, and you can also see the ways in which it touches other levels. And just because you maybe don't have all of the knowledge behind it, there's still a really fascinating and wonderful way to engage with it. And like you said, and maybe down the line you end up writing a book.
Well, I think it's also a little. When you look back on it, it takes the form of a narrative. But at the time, you're just like, hey, you want to do this thing? And you have, you're young, so you have 10 hours to kill. And so you go and do it, and there's a way in which it looking back on it, it seems more purposeful. We also, like, for instance, I remember, weren't you also in the class we used to call rap? black male writers, or did you?
Yes, yeah.
So there was an important class, I think, at Harvard called Black Male Writers, taught by a professor, Carol Livia Haran, who's a writer herself. And she, the first day, stands up and says, "Well, I'm gonna teach a lot of hip hop." So it was the height of hip hop. She brought Public Enemy to class, Queen Latifah. I mean, and we just talked about hip hop in the same way we're talking about how important The Voice did. So it was just kind of there, for you to think about. And meaning, I still have my signed diaspora with Queen Latifah, which I had Queen Latifah sign. It was just kind of an amazing moment to take that stuff seriously, but also be able to dance with it, because there were some great dance parties too.
Because there were also some great dance parties. Kevin, you dedicated your book, The Gray Album, on the blackness of blackness to Colson, even, right?
Absolutely.
So this is we're talking about like a strong friendship that then moved on kind of past college.
Cole had, I think before then, he had dedicated The Colossus of New York to me. So
exactly.
Yes. And that was his nonfiction book, and that was my nonfiction book. The funny story about that is, it says for Colson Whitehead, my brother, and someone came up to me and said, "Oh, someone I knew was like, I didn't know you guys were brothers." I was like, think for a second, like just one more pause, and they were like, "Oh, yeah." It took a minute. So
can I ask? And I'll start with you, Colson. How does your work influence one another's, and how does this friendship influence your work?
I don't know. I mean, Kevin's always been so generous, and having someone who's your age going through the same thing. There's overlap between what we're trying to do, but also we're on separate paths. And when we can intersect, it's a great kind of collision. Talking about that road trip. Kevin's going to the Stegner, right? Your first time doing the Stegner film?
Stegner, and I got a fellowship at McDowell, so I came back east, and then we drove back. Cole and I, when I say we drove back, Cole doesn't drive, so he was just smoking and keeping me awake because he smoked them. So, yeah.
Not to fall asleep though in the passenger.
It was cool. I was like, let's do it in a day, because you're crazy. You're like 23. It's like, let's just do it in like maybe 2 days. And of course, it didn't work out like that. But.
Yeah, I was a navigator, but I think a lot about that. Listening to the different Howl tapes, because you had like Howl by Ginsberg, like 58 in a small cafe, and like 62 somewhere else, and the poem would evolve, how you read it would evolve.
Yep.
And I remember saying like, I want to write a book about John Henry, and it was a time of like sort of confessing like these artistic ambitions that were like you don't want to say too loudly, even to yourself.
Right.
Like you don't need to tell other people. But Kevin's always a person you could tell that stuff to, and he would be like, "That's really great," and can't wait to see it. And it's been that way, sort of all along. We're both. I would say fairly productive, and there's just there's that focus, and I think that I won't say dedication, but I think we don't have to force it. I think we're interested in the work, and so we do it, even when we have young kids or we have jobs and teaching jobs, and we always find a way to get to the next project, no matter what it takes. And Kevin's always been the sort of example and major force of encouragement for 30 years. I mean, Most Way Home, his first book was accepted by, was it Morrow?
Yeah, William Morrow brought it out. Yeah.
And like 94, 95, and
yeah.
And I was like in my underwear in my studio, like, am I ever going to write a novel, or whatever? And and he was just like. He was doing it and just provided like this great inspiration and example.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Well, I remember vividly that road trip, which I have pictures from somewhere, and I remember I remember you saying that about John Henry Days. It was like, I think you literally said, "I want to write a tone poem about John Henry Days," and I was like, I want to read that tone poem, I want to read it. And to this day, that's one of my favorite books of his, because it is kaleidoscopic and American and big and reaching. And of course, he's returned to those kind of scale of writing over and over again. And, I felt like for me, Basquiat was kind of trying to do some of the things that John Henry was doing for him. And there was always this kind of way in which I felt like we did have what Cole said, these kind of connectings and overlaps and then going our way. And quite specifically, there were certain books that we each read of the others that I think were really, for me at least, was really important. Him reading Jelly Roll, which was kind of merged at one point with Black Mariah, which was a film noir. But I was really nervous to pull them apart. And I remember giving it to him, and I think he literally said like, "Sure, try it." Like, like you should. Like, why? And it was encouraging. Like, don't. I don't know. There was a way in which he was both like so serious about it, and then also able to be like, it's just it's not a life or death decision, at least yet. And so I was able to kind of do it in the safety of that friendship and show it to him later, and he vibed on it. So that was kind of important, and it wasn't kind of important. It was very important, and and there were a few times like we took road trips together that were crucial for either one or the other's research, and I think that was really we traded houses different times for each other to write in. I have the map that I wrote for him, like this is where the convenience store is, like because we would crash and do those kinds of things too.
Yeah, since I don't drive, I had to research John Henry in Talcott, West Virginia. So I was like, hello, Kevin, if you like taking a road trip. And I have this picture, which I just keeps floating around, but it's like a Polaroid of like some weird random street in Talcott, West Virginia in the spring. And it emerged like the muck in my office, like
look,
a few months ago.
I literally found this.
No, hey, you hold on, so close.
You have to hold that. That's me, I think.
That's Kevin with long hair.
Yeah.
The camera.
You have to bring yours up too.
Yeah, bring yours up as well.
This is a bunch of cars.
But this is the same trip.
Same trip, yeah. It literally just popped out of a book.
Yeah.
The
The memorabilia is creeping.
That's incredible, and like you said, and the work that comes out of it is so like you were talking about, kind of pulling apart Jelly, that goes on to be a finalist for the National Book Award. These are things that build, like, eventually these steps, these friendships build your career. But you did bring up John Henry Days a bunch, so I wanted to kind of ask about this. Colson, you've stated that John Henry was the first Black superhero you were aware of. And so, Kevin, I wanted to ask, do you have a memory of a first Black superhero? And then for both of you, are you enjoying this time in pop culture where we have more Black superheroes in the mainstream?
Yes, to all that. I mean, I read a lot of Luke Cage, and actually on that same road trip, I think I bought Luke Cage #1 on that road trip. We stopped in somewhere like Wyoming or something, and I found it. Yeah, and so it was like $20, which seemed like that's crazy. $20, it cost $2. And so buying that. So Luke Cage was kind of this funny character, but I read Fantastic Four and collected that, and have the first appearance of Black Panther from a long time ago, and so. All those heroes were great, and I think for me, having a young kid, and who's not so young anymore, he's 14, but watching Spider-Man together, or the Miles Morales Spider-Man, or Black Panther, it's just incredible to see. And when I was at the Schomburg Center before, we had a Black Comic Book Festival, and so to see kind of full circle the ways that comic books became really serious, but we took them seriously, and you couldn't really tell anyone, at least when I was growing up, if you want to, I don't know, not get made fun of or have a date ever or something. So it's funny now that you take your
in my high school. I didn't.
What's that? That's what you're doing wrong. Yeah. I was like, comic books, they are graphic novels, you turn them into something. But now it's the nerd's revenge, I guess, everywhere.
Wait, hang on, I do have one follow up there. Why was Luke Cage $20 in Wyoming?
Because it was the first issue from like 30 years before.
Oh, I that makes way more sense.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't an increase, black tax or anything, though.
Yeah, but that seems like such a steal, actually.
Yes, now it does.
That's wonderful. And Colson?
yeah, just to follow up on that, on kids seeing Black Panther and being inspired by what's on the screen and who's working, behind the screen. I wanted to write because of, say Stan Lee reading comic books, but also just like, seventh grade, we had one of those, books of short stories in English class. And it was like The Lottery and The Swimmer, and then the first chapter of the Battle Royale section and Invisible Man. And I remember just being like, that section's pretty crazy. They're fighting on an electrified mat. There's like a blonde lady with like American flag on her stomach, and it's just pretty wild. And I definitely connected it to like the sci-fi and fantasy that I was loving at the time. And I think that's the only sort of fiction by a Black writer I had in elementary school or high school. And I just remember being like, 10 or 11 and thinking, obviously I haven't read the whole book, but Ralph Ellison seems like a weirdo. He's a Black weirdo. I'm a Black weirdo. I can do this. And definitely, when I do readings in bookstores, I hope there's like that one 16-year-old Black weirdo who's like, this guy's crazy. I'm pretty loopy. Maybe I can do it also.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely what's happening. And it leads in perfectly. My last, or not last, but the kind of question I wanted to bring us home in a little bit is thinking about, we're talking a lot about how pop culture influenced both of your work and the work that you grew up with, how it comes out in your writing and your poetry. But that's a two-way street, right? Literature obviously also influences pop culture. And that feels especially true right now. It feels like there's so many TV shows and movies and other forms of entertainment that are coming out of books. And we'll talk about the Underground Railroad in a second. But I wanted to ask, like, what forms of pop culture, be it TV shows, comics, movies, what are the things influenced by books, either modern or in the past, that you found yourselves drawn to? And whoever wants to take it first.
I don't know, Kevin, do you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, I think you're saying what is the pop culture that's influenced by literature? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Basically, we're seeing a lot of shows, like The Queen's Gambit was just a hit, right? We've got the Underground Railroad coming.
But I think that's what I'm looking forward to, is more of Colson's books, and stuff like that being made. Having Barry Jenkins do that, I think is a wonderful marriage of these sensibilities. And I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to say, I've seen some of Barry Jenkins' interviews about the TV show and what he's done, and he's so far done an adaptation. So Beale Street Could Talk, Moonlight wasn't, he didn't write Moonlight, Underground Railroad, and he said like Kubrick only did adaptation. So The Shining, he worked with collaborators, 2001, and I think so obviously the great directors who have figured out the fine art of adaptation. It's not just putting the book on the screen; it's figuring out how it actually works for a different medium. But also in terms of Kubrick, he has a war movie, he has a sci-fi movie, a horror movie, and and consuming his work as a kid, I thought that's how you work as an artist. You try different things, and so I've done my poker book or my zombie novel or my historical fiction just because that's how you work. You draw from different genres and different places of inspiration, whether it's novels. Music, we haven't talked about music that much, but it's very important, to both of us.
To part of the work. Is there? I mean, you did mention The Shining. Were there other, were there other pieces of literature that you maybe discovered through pop culture first? Is like kind of what I was thinking. So for myself, for example, The Shining would be a great example. If I watched the movie and then I kind of got to discover Stephen King and the kind of the worlds that opened up. Thinking about how pop culture and literature can kind of be this two-way street. Another example is like The Hobbit, the cartoon. I don't know if you guys remember, long before the Lord of the Rings movie.
Yeah, of course.
I remember loving that cartoon and then reading the book.
There's also a Lord of the Rings movie in the early 80s, which is
Ralph Bashkin.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anything like that you kind of, it's almost a reverse engineering that you discovered through through pop culture that drew you to literature, or through music that drew you to books and film?
I don't know, all of Shakespeare, like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, it's hard to remember because, I don't think it matters which way you come at it. That's part of the hesitation in answering, because to me, the point is getting at it, and getting to the root, because we've all seen movies that were better than the book, and sometimes it's because it was a bad book that they did something totally different from. And, there's nothing more pleasurable when both are great. And that's what I'm really looking forward to in Underground Railroad.
And also getting away from the separation, of the two genres. Or, it's all one thing. It's art.
Yeah.
It's all one thing. It's art. Colson, have you seen the show? Are you allowed to talk too much about it?
I have seen it. I saw it like 2 weeks ago. It's incredible, incredibly moving. I talked with Barry Jenkins a bit about his plans for adaptation. Say in the Underground Railroad, Cora's in an attic for 60 pages. And on the page, that's great. She can have memories. She can look out, through the window. But on a screen, it's very static. So how do you fix that for film or television? And his solution was really ingenious. And so seeing all his different choices he made for this 10-hour thing, really just marvelous. It's really moving. Enough things are changed that I actually don't know what's going to happen. Like, he changed one thing, and it's like, suddenly I feel in suspense about a book that I wrote, because he changed that's really fun, that's really works. And I guess when I was moving history around for the book, my motto was that I wouldn't stick to the facts of history, but I would stick to the truth. And Barry's definitely stuck to the truth of the novel while changing the facts on the ground. And so it's I want to watch it again. Talking about people being inspired to read a book from a TV show. My daughter, who's sort of hasn't read my book yet, is like, well, I guess I have to read the book now so I can see the show. So I got one reader so far out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
You've moved one copy. All right, and final, kind of in closing here, it was so wonderful to discuss this topic with you both, and to discuss your friendship. If you were talking to a young writer or any person making any form of art, any form, is there any advice you would have to them about incorporating pop culture into their work, into responding to, like we're talking about it, it's in the water, to responding to what's around them, and especially if they were attacking something as highbrow? I mean, you're the New Yorker poetry editor, Kevin, like something as poetry or novels that have won the Pulitzer, like what type of way to incorporate what they see around them in their work?
Well, I would say, don't incorporate pop culture if you don't like it. Everyone's different. It works for us. We're not saying like you can only make great artistic choices by drawing from pop culture. If you have no interest in everything that we've talked about, tell us to take a long walk over a short pier and figure out your own art. So basically, my motto is figure out your own art. Don't listen to me.
That's good advice. We'd have to listen to you in order to follow it. Oh, anyway.
Wow, Chris, a live critique.
No, it's brilliant. I think for me, it's more specific. I would say I agree totally. It's not necessary to do. But I made a few weird rules when I was writing, say, the Basquiat book, and they included like I couldn't end with like a line from someone else's great song. Like I had to figure out my own ending, and that was just a way to kind of keep me honest. I was, making use of Basquiat, and then I was making use of the pop culture he referred to, and then the pop culture he inspired or riffed off of, or Charlie Parker, or all the kind of tragic Black geniuses that were circulating his tragic genius. And so I had to make little rules, and I also couldn't, for instance, I wouldn't refer to him by his first name, or I had to call him by his last name. I had to have this kind of distance. And some of that I think, is equivalent of point of view in novels, or you have to come up with some rules too. And maybe that's also what I like about genres, is they have kind of these rules and limits, and you can break them, of course, but sometimes it's fun to be like, I'm going to do what they say they're going to do, and create a mystery, and so therefore not tell you what exactly I'm trying to get at. There's these forms of kind of plot suspense, but also of form and genre, and I think poets are in love with those kinds of things. The first book about film, the first really good one, was by a poet, Vachel Lindsay, 100 years ago, and so there is this kind of connection to that weird spectacle that also then somehow you might want to try to get in a poem. And those kind of transformations, I guess that's the thing I would say, is it requires a kind of transformation. You can't simply just import it wholesale. And what I think Cole has done so beautifully is do that transformation over and over again, and from sentence to sentence in his work.
Well, I think, whether it's biographical material, something that happened to you, or pop culture, some sort of outside element, does it serve the work? Sag Harbor is about growing up in the 80s. It's the summer of 85. And I had to figure out what pop culture would serve the main character, because I have to serve the higher aims of the story. It's not just me talking about Star Wars for 300 pages, which I would be happy to do, but it's not that interesting. How can I take The Road Warrior, Lottie Dottie, that early single, take The Cosby Show, and shape our communal culture to serve the story of this one kid? Take what we all know about these other kind of texts and incorporate it into the work so that it serves, and it's not just floating as a gratuitous reference. And also, I haven't taught in a while, but finding not the cliched thing, but the real, but maybe the offbeat thing. I can't think of how many workshop stories I got where like the main character starts whistling Once in a Lifetime by the Talking Heads. It's like, no, not another one. It's only been 2 weeks and someone's used Once in a Lifetime to talk about the modern life. So, use your unique personality to make it work and serve your art.
And serve your art. Well, thank you both very much. I would say that's something you have both spent a lifetime doing, and it was absolutely wonderful talking with you. And thank you so much. And Colson, congrats on the award. I'm going to do a thing that I do because these things always feel so weird, in which I'm going to clap. If you're at home watching this, feel free to clap along. Nicely done. And thank you all very much for joining us.
Isaac, Kevin, it's been an honor.
You're my hero.